Hello, everybody. Day 852, I believe, of Leviticus online Bible study. I think that's about right, give or take a few. Today we are doing chapter 13 of Leviticus. Long chapter, lots of reading. I'm going to go ahead and read it. If you don't want to listen to the whole thing, because it's 59 verses, I get it. You can pause here, maybe fast forward if you can try and figure out where I stop. I don't know, a couple minutes, 5 minutes from now. Or you can read it by yourself. You can follow along, whatever the case. Here we go. We're going to dive right into it. I think it's good and important for us to actually read the entirety of God's Word, not just make assumptions on things, even when it seems boring and repetitive. That's okay. So, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a person has on the skin of his body a swelling or an eruption or a spot, and it turns into a case of leprous disease on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priests. And the priest shall examine the diseased area on the skin of his body, and if the hair in the diseased area has turned white, and the disease appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a case of leprous disease. When the priest has examined him, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if the spot is white in the skin of his body, and it appears no deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall shut up the diseased person for 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the disease is checked, and the disease is not spread in the skin, then the priest shall shut him up for another 7 days. And the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day. And if the diseased area is faded, and the disease is not spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only an eruption. And if he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the eruption spreads in the skin, after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again before the priest. And the priest shall look, and if the eruption is spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous disease. When a man is afflicted with a leprous disease, he shall be brought to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and there is a raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprous disease in the skin of the body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not shut him up, for he is unclean. And if the leprous disease breaks out in the skin, so the leprous disease covers all the skin of the diseased person from head to foot, so far as the priest can see, then the priest shall look, and if the leprous disease has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean of the disease. It is all turned white, and he is clean. But when raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. And the priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. Raw flesh is unclean, for it is a leprous disease. But if the raw flesh recovers and turns white again, then he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him, and if the disease is turned white, then the priest shall pronounce the diseased person clean. He is clean. If there is in the skin of one's body a boil, and it heals, and in the place of the boil there comes a white swelling or a reddish white spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if it appears deeper than the skin, and if its hairs turn white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease that is broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in it, and is not deeper than the skin, but is faded, then the priest shall shut him up for 7 days. And if it spreads in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease. But if the spot remains in one place and does not spread, it is a scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or when the body has a burn on its skin, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a spot, reddish white or white, the priest shall examine it. And if the hair in the spot is turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, then it is a leprous disease. It is broken out in the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in the spot, and is no deeper than the skin, but is faded, the priest shall shut him up for 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it is spreading in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease. But if the spot remains in one place and does not spread in the skin, but is faded, it is swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar of the burn. When a man or a woman has a disease on the head or the beard, the priest shall examine the disease, and if it appears deeper than the skin, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an itch, a leprous disease of the head or the beard. And if the priest examines the itching disease, and it appears no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall shut up the person with the itching disease for 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the disease. If the itch is not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the itch appears to be no deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself. But the itch he shall not shave. And the priest shall shut up the person with the itching disease for another 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the itch, and if the itch is not spread in the skin, and it appears to be no deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the itch spreads in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. And if the itch is spread in the skin, the priest need not seek for the yellow hair, he is unclean. But if in his eyes the itch is unchanged, and black hair is grown in it, the itch is healed, and he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has spots on the skin of the body, white spots, the priest shall look. And if the spots on the skin of the body are a dull white, it is leukoderma that is broken out in the skin, he is clean. If a man's hair falls out from his head, he is bald, he is clean. And if a man's hair falls out of his forehead, he has baldness on the forehead, he is clean. But if there is a bald head, or the bald forehead, a reddish-white diseased area, it is a leprous disease breaking out on the bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine him, and if the diseased swelling is reddish-white on the bald head or on his bald forehead, like the appearance of leprous disease in the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean. His disease is on his head. The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. When there is a case of leprous disease in a garment, whether a woolen or linen garment, in warp or woof of the linen or wool, or in the skin, or in anything made of skin, if the disease is greenish or reddish in the garment, or in the skin, or in the warp, or the woof, or in any article made of skin, it is a case of leprous disease, and it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall examine the disease, and shut up that which is diseased for 7 days. Then he shall examine the disease on the 7th day. If the disease is spread in the garment, in the warp, or the woof, or in the skin, whatever be the use of the skin, the disease is a persistent leprous disease, it is unclean. And he shall burn the garment, or the warp, or the woof, the wool, or the linen, or any article made of skin that is diseased, for it is persistent leprous disease. It shall be burned in fire. And if the priest examines, and if disease is not spread in the garment, or the warp, or the woof, or in any article made of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which the disease is, and it shall be shut up for another 7 days. And the priest shall examine the diseased thing after it has been washed. And if the appearance of the disease area has not changed, though the disease is not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire, whether the rot is on the back or on the front. But if the priest examines, and if the diseased area has faded after it has been washed, he shall tear it out of the garment of the skin, or the warp, or the woof. Then, if it appears again in the garment, or the warp, or the woof, or is in any article made of skin, it is spreading. You shall burn with fire whatever has the disease. But the garment, or the warp, or the woof, or any article made of skin from which the disease departs, when you have washed it, shall then be washed a second time and be clean. This is the law for a case of leprous disease in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or the woof, or in any article made of skin, to determine whether it is clean or unclean. This is the word of the Lord. Goodness, that was a lot of reading. Okay. And it kind of seems monotonous, doesn't it? It kind of seems boring and kind of maybe even a little bit pointless. And to us, it kind of is, right? So let's go over what's taking place here. Just a quick note here. We're going to continue on in chapter 14 next time. And that's going to be speaking about more about skin diseases as well, and the outcomes of that. So this is a long chapter. And you kind of have to sit there and wonder, why is it so important of these skin diseases versus other diseases? Why is it the clothing is so important? And all of this has to do with the cleanliness, the ritual cleanliness of the person or the article of clothing. Okay? So, to begin with, let's just go over what just took place, right? These are addressed, these sayings are addressed to Moses and to Aaron. Obviously to Aaron because, as we read a number of different times, the high priest or another one of the priests are going to be the ones who diagnose the case. They're going to be the ones who take a look at the disease, whether it's in a person, whether it's on an article of clothing, and they're going to be the ones who make the judgment call. So Aaron gets to hear this as well, right? There's a number of different cases, situations that occur. They can all kind of be summarized into 8 different places, right? So first, instruction that deals with the case of a suspected skin disease. That's going to be the first part. Then we've got instruction outlining the procedures for the certification of a person with a skin disease. So certainly somebody who does have a skin disease. Then we're going to outline the procedure diagnosing scars from boils. Then fourth has to do with burns. Then we're going to talk about things that deal with the head or the jaw, the beard area of a man or a woman. Then sixth deals with inflamed patches that are all over the entire body. That's just a short little paragraph there. Seventh deals with hair loss, right? Baldness, right? Whether it's a receding hairline or whether it's completely bald. Technically, I just have a receding hairline. I shave everything because I look really old if I don't. Right? And then the 8th deals with clothing. Okay. So in all of these, we have a certain procedure that is set forth. It's pretty much the same exact procedure. So if you kind of understand the procedure for one, you understand the procedure for all 8. There's maybe some small differences here or there, but it's pretty much the same for all of them. So first, there's this primary appearance, and I'm assuming usually it's not a priest who finds this. It's the person themselves who sees this, or their spouse, or their child, or somebody who's close with them sees this possible skin disease, right? And this could be anything from a discoloration, a scab, a bright patch, a boil, burning, right? Something that looks infected, right? So then they're actually going to be taken to the priest, and so the priest is now going to examine this even more. And what he's going to be looking for, in accordance with what Leviticus says, what he's looking for is white hair, right? Now that may be different for some of us who are blonde, but what that's basically saying is hair that looks different coming out of that area than the rest of the body, right? I'm assuming that the majority of the Israelites during that time had darker, more coarse hair, maybe, and so that's why it's speaking of yellow or whitish hair, wispy sort of hair. So if hair that looks completely different than the rest of the body, that's something that the priests are going to be looking for here, right? And then also taking a look as, if that area there, if it's just on the surface or if it's actually grown deeper and it's infesting the flesh underneath, not just the skin, but the flesh underneath. That's going to be a big deal right there. If the priest sees that right away, right, white hair or something that's infecting the flesh underneath, automatically, boom, the person is declared unclean. We'll talk about why in a second. If not, right, if there's an infection but there's no white hair, it doesn't appear to be a little bit deeper, that's when we're going to have the quarantine. And there's 2 different sections of the quarantine. Basically, it's 7 days, re-examine, 7 days again, re-examine. If after the first 7 days it seems to be spreading, it seems to get deeper, there's a discoloration in the hair, then immediately unclean. If everything's the same, then another 7 days. If after those 7 days, if it hasn't spread, if it hasn't gotten deeper, then they'll be declared clean, right? So that's basically the level of what's going on here. Okay, everybody understand that? Whew. All right. Okay, the same has to do with the clothing too. We read that at the end. All right, so now let's talk about the actual theological analysis. What theologically is happening here, right? And what we should know first and foremost is this is not a medical diagnosis, right? The priests aren't being charged to medically diagnose somebody. Not to say that they don't care about somebody's physical health, but their job, their responsibility is to speak of clean things or declare things clean or declare things unclean. So that's all that they're doing here, right? Okay. Secondly, we're not going to pretend, and some proponents against the Bible and all of this sort of stuff saying, see, the Bible can't be real because they don't talk about all the skin diseases. Well, that's not the purpose of what's happening here. right? What is set before Moses and Aaron here are skin diseases that may actually be attacking the flesh, right? So this is, and causing somebody to be unclean. So this section, all of chapter 13 and chapter 14 later on as well, this section speaks of, its focus is upon infections that actually kill off the flesh in the body and make it decay. Right? That's, so again, we talked about that with the hair. If there is a discoloration in the hair in that area, the assumption is that the flesh is dying, right? The disease is killing the flesh, and so the flesh doesn't have the ability to actually make the hair grow normally, and it's going to be weaker, it's going to be wispier, it's going to be thinner, it's going to be a different color. It's not going to be this coarse, dark color that it usually is. Okay. So that's the whole purpose here, right? Trying to find out if there is this decay, because the thing is, if there's this decay, this is seen as the mark of death upon a person, even if it's just in this small little area. We've got decaying flesh in this area, right? So it's actually turning some part of the body into, for lack of a better term, it's turning it into a corpse. It's killing this part of the flesh. So it's a dead flesh right here. This is a corpsey part of the flesh. That's the deal, right? And so this is a sign, or it's seen as a sign of turning the body, a living body, into a corpse before the actual death of the person. And what that will actually do is it actually brings the same type of impurity upon that person and anybody who touches that area, or anything that touches that area, the same sort of impurity that comes with touching a carcass, right, or a corpse. We talked about that a couple weeks ago when we saw Aaron's two oldest sons struck down by the Lord in the first divine service within the tabernacle, and the priest could not touch the dead body, right? The Levites had to, and the Levites couldn't remove the dead body by touching the body either. They had to pick them up by their garments and remove them. Remember that? Okay. We also kind of see a progression from maybe not so bad skin diseases all the way to really bad skin diseases. So there is this progression of that. Progression would be up, I suppose, right? This progression of skin diseases, some are worse than others, right? Some are covering the whole body, some are opening up raw ulcers, right? And then also we talked about the head too, because that's the worst place for you to receive a skin disease. Again, we're not talking medically. Now, maybe that's true medically. I don't know. I'm no dermatologist. I'm no physician, and that's not the point of this. We've got to talk about this understanding of cleanliness, ritually clean, ritually unclean. So in regards to the realm of clean and unclean, the worst place that you can have a disease that is actually causing flesh to die would be on the head, right? Because the head is the head of the body. The head represents the entirety of the body. So if the head is unclean, then the entirety of the body is unclean as well. So that's why we have those specific sections. It seems like, oh, why do they care if there's a difference between the arm and the head? Well, the arm doesn't represent the whole body. The head represents the whole body. And for these people, well, not just for these people, but we'll talk about this in a little bit. So what happens to the individuals who are declared to be unclean? Okay? They're declared to be unclean by the priest who's standing as God's representative, because this disease that they have speaks to or points forward to or is a smaller portion of death. And that disqualifies them from the living God's presence. Okay? Death is not a good thing. Death is an enemy. Death brings death to life, that which God has created. So carcasses and corpses and dying flesh is not a good, clean thing. It is an unclean thing. It is an unholy thing and must be kept away from God's presence. So this affects the people in two real sorts of ways, right? And again, this is going to be different than what we see in the New Testament, what we see in, goodness, in our churches in today's day and age as well, right? This affects them in real ways that has to do with their religious life and their daily life as well. So it excludes them from the sanctuary. They are not allowed to go into the the tabernacle later on the temple. They're not allowed to bring sacrifices, okay? And they're also not allowed to eat any holy food. So remember, if your family member would bring a sacrifice, they would bring a portion of that sacrifice home after it has been dedicated and all of this. They bring that home and they're supposed to eat that with themselves and with their family members and all who live underneath that house. Well, if you are unclean, then you are not allowed to eat that holy food that comes from the Lord's table. And they're also excluded from participation in just regular common meals, too, unclean people, and regular everyday common life of the holy community, because their skin disease gives this impurity, this uncleanliness, either by direct or even by indirect contact with other people. So if you directly or indirectly come into contact with the unclean person who has this skin disease, this rotting flesh disease, you are declared to be unclean as well. So again, I don't know if when we think about like these leprous groups of people, we see this in the New Testament, right? That they're living outside of the city all by themselves, and we get to see this with Jesus cleansing the 10 lepers in Luke. I don't believe, now maybe it kind of transformed into this, but initially it's not, we need to keep these people away because we don't want to get that diseased. That might be part of it, and there might be something medically about, hey, if this person has this flesh-eating disease and then you're close to them, you might get that flesh-eating disease as well. I would venture to say that you would probably have to have some sort of open wound or cut and have that flesh-eating disease actually get into that. But again, I'm no doctor. But that's not, I don't believe, the primary concern here. The primary concern is this ritual cleanliness and this ritual uncleanliness. That's what's taking place here. So we had these groups of lepers who were forced to live outside of the city, right? If it got really bad, if your skin disease got really bad, if it was on your head or cover your whole body and you had open sores all over the place, you were relegated to outside of the camp, outside of the city, and that's where you dwelt with all the rest of the days of your life. In chapter 14, we'll see what happens if if your body can fight off that disease. We see what happens and how you're ritually brought back in. And we can see that play out in the New Testament. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more specifically next week in Luke, when Jesus encounters the 10 lepers and he cleanses the 10 lepers, right? 9 of them are Jews, one's a Samaritan. And then he sends them to the priest. And the priest is to declare, right, that they are clean, because only the priest can do that. Okay. What else? Okay, yeah. So just a little bit more of those who have this skin disease on their heads. All right, because it represents their whole body, they have to do something even more. They have to tear their clothes. And they have to go around with disheveled hair, right? They're not allowed to care for their hair. And this is the same sort of thing that people would do when they're mourning somebody who's died. So this is a precursor. You're actually mourning your own death. That is what these people are doing. They're relegated to wearing torn clothes and disheveled hair. And this is what you do when somebody dies. And so they're not mourning anybody else's death. They're mourning their own living death that they're beginning, and inevitably, if this disease doesn't rectify itself, or if a miracle, Jesus passing by, doesn't fix it, then you're gonna die from it, right? Bad stuff, not good at all. And so those people actually have to stand outside of the camp. They have to cover their mouths, right? We're good at that. We've got masks all over the place now. Maybe we just got this from Leviticus. We're all a bunch of lepers. I guess that's what we are, right? We got to cover our mouths And what do they have to do? They have to run around, and anytime somebody close gets to them, they have to yell out, unclean, unclean. They do it twice. That's not just so that, in case they didn't hear it the first time, this is I'm doubly unclean. Not only do I have a flesh-eating disease on my body, which makes me unclean, I've got it on my head, which represents my entirety of my body. I'm a walking, living death, right? I'm a walking, living corpse. That's what I am. And so I have to, unclean, unclean, keep everybody away from me. I'm doubly unclean. Not good stuff at all. Yeah. Talking a little bit more about the head. In Leviticus and in the Old Testament, the head, like we said, it represents the whole body. It's very significant for the Israelites. It's very significant in Leviticus. We've seen this already from the good aspect of it, right? So the good aspect of it, we'll talk about for the priest, high priest, right? Their head is anointed with oil, and every subsequent high priest after Aaron, their head is anointed with oil as well. They are not to go about with their hair disheveled in mourning. They're not allowed to do that. Priests, when they're in the tabernacle, they wear, the high priest wears a turban, right? It's a very special turban. And the other priests wear a head covering as well, signifying their office and what they're there for. On the bad side of it, right? People sentenced to death for blasphemy before they were stoned. They had the people who heard this blasphemy, and once they were found guilty of it, the people who heard this blasphemy and brought this charge against them, they would actually go and put their hands upon the head of the blasphemer. We'll see later on that the high priest places his hand upon the head of the scapegoat. That's going to come later on, placing the whole sins of the people upon the head of the scapegoat there. And just as one example, if you look at Second Chronicles, I don't have the chapter and verse in front of me, but it's where King Uzziah, he actually does an act of sacrilege, where instead of allowing the priest to go into the holy place and offer incense, he thinks, oh, I'm the king, I can do this. And so he is disrespecting or desecrating the Lord's headship over and holiness over the entirety of Israel. God said, no, this is the way that the tabernacle works, right? And people stand as my representatives, and the way they do this is X, Y, and Z. And King Uzziah just says, I can do this. And he goes into the holy place in order to offer incense because he thinks he's good enough to do that. And as an act of punishment brought upon King Uzziah for that desecration of God's holiness and the holy place and the temple there, he receives a flesh-eating skin disease on his forehead there. Okay. And we also see that clothing can be, and we've talked about this a little bit before, clothing can be holy, common, or unclean. The holy type are for the office of high priest or priest, right? These are the priestly vestments. And so they're sanctified by oil and blood, the blood of the ordination sacrifice. And so these vestments, when they are worn, they clothe the person who wears them in this office, right? In this holy office. Then every other type of clothing is just a common type of clothing that you can, and everybody and anybody can wear. And then there's the unclean. A priestly or a holy vestment can become unclean just as much as a common vestment or a common piece of clothing can become unclean. And this is just by contact with something unclean, a carcass, skin disease, or mold, as it's talked about in our reading, or they call it leprosy of the cloth in the ESV. It's basically just a piece of cloth that has a mold in it or a type of disease that's actually eating the cloth away, right? So if wool, remember they didn't have synthetic stuff there. There's no t-shirts made of polyester, but it was all like either cotton or it was hide or it was something like that. So all of these things could actually get a mold, could get a disease within it, an infection in the clothing. We don't talk like that anymore, but you know what I mean. And if that spreads and can't be contained and can't be washed away, then it renders the entirety of that garment unclean, and that garment has no use at all. It can't be used as a priestly vestment if it once was, and you as a common person just couldn't wear something that was unclean either. You had to burn it. You had to completely burn it. The only way that you didn't is if the mold stops and it's just in that place, and if you wash it away, it kind of becomes a little lighter, and you notice that it's not spreading away. Then you have to cut out that little area of it, and then you can continue using that piece of garment. Okay, so that's everything that happens there. We'll talk a little bit, not a lot more next time about the fulfillment of Christ here, because the fulfillment of Christ in regards to the leprous disease of the person, that comes into full understanding at the end of chapter 14. We'll talk about that next week. But here, we're just going to talk a little bit real quickly about the clothes, right? So again, we talked about in Leviticus, clothing was associated with bodily purity. That qualified or allowed a person to come into access into the sanctuary. It qualified people in the priestly office to do the priestly things, the holy and holy things, right? But also, you could not come into the sanctuary in unclean garments. You had to come in clean garments. So it allowed you access to the sanctuary and also allowed you access to receive and eat the food that came from the Lord's table, part of those sacrifices. This was a big deal for the Israelites during that time. And so if we actually extrapolate this out and we bring this out into the New Testament church, bring this out into how Christ actually fulfills this, we can just start with this outer flesh that we have. Paul talks about that, right? I think it's in Thessalonians, right? The outer flesh that is wasting away, right? That's our body. Even if we don't have a leprous disease that's actually eating us from the inside out, our bodies, all of us who are 40 and older, can tell that our bodies are dying and wasting away, and they're getting closer and closer to death, right? We're all far from God's glory. Romans chapter 3:23 explains that to us. And then so we all need, in our old Adam, our old sinful flesh, we need to receive the new clothing of the new Adam, of Christ, right? And so in our baptism, we put away our old self. And I'm just going to read a couple different verses. I'll shout them out if you need to jot them down and look them up on your own later on. But this is what we get in Colossians chapter 2, right? Colossians chapter 2, verse 11, where the Apostle Paul tells us, right? In him you were also circumcised. In Jesus you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of flesh by the circumcision of Christ. We're talking about baptism there. Putting off the body of flesh, this old, evil, sinful flesh. And we're clothed with Christ now. Colossians 3, 9 through 10 tells us that. And it's speaking here, do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off your old self with all of its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. This is speaking about what one of the beautiful graces and benefits that we receive through baptism, right? Baptized into Christ. Galatians speaks about this as well. Galatians chapter 3. I know we're over 30 minutes. Stay with me. We're almost done here. Galatians chapter 3, verse 27 speaks about this as well. For as many as of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. You have put on Christ. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 23 through 24. We've got the same thing here. And be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. This is all baptismal language, and it's all putting on the new self of Christ. He is our clothing, right? In Christ we have access to the Father. We're granted that wedding garment that Jesus speaks about in the parable of the great wedding feast in Matthew chapter 23, right? They all receive this garment that enables them to be at the wedding feast. They didn't bring it themselves. They didn't make it. They didn't buy it. It was all given to them. They came to the wedding feast. You get it. There you go. Awesome. This is what enables you to eat at this wedding feast. That's baptismal talk. That is Jesus speaking about himself. And then also we see this, and maybe one of the most beautiful places we see this, and we get to hear it every single year on All Saints' Day, is those coming out of the Great Tribulation, right? Where John gets to see this. This is Revelation chapter 7, verses 14 and following. Paul sees a great multitude standing before the throne from every tribe and nation. And he's asked, who are these? And he says, sir, you know. And he's told, these are those who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Right? So even the church triumphant, they are all standing with this new flesh that is theirs, this new robe of righteousness, not their own, but it's made righteousness because it is been given to them in the blood of the Lamb, right? They've dipped their robes in the blood of the Lamb. What they wear is now Christ, and they are clean. Okay, that was a lot, and I know I read for 8 minutes, so that's a lot too, but oh my gosh, 36 minutes. Okay, I'm ending it there. Next time, chapter 14. Thank you.